Te Awamutu Museum developed the exhibition 100 Years in Print to celebrate the centenary of our community newspaper. For the first 25 years, the paper was called the Waipa Post. In 1936, it changed its name to Te Awamutu Courier, which is what it's still called. The exhibition looks at three different aspects of the operation of the newspaper. The first point is called More Than a Family Business. The Te Awamutu Courier was started by the Warburton family, and in some respects it was a family business. 4 generations of the Warburton family took a leading hand in the operation of the paper. But it was more than a family business. In the early days, in 1911 and the few years before that, it was actually the town fathers who gathered together and discussed the role of the newspaper and the way in which it would help form some cohesion for the growing town. Another way in which it was more than a family newspaper was that it employed quite a number of the locals from Te Awamutu. At its height, it was not only a newspaper but a publishing company for many periodicals and many other newspapers. And so it was a very good employer for many locals in the community. The exhibition shows some of the early archives from the development of the paper, and it shows some artefacts from the Printers' Union, which was called the Chapel in the time-honoured tradition of the print industry that originates in the days when print was very much a church-based medium. We'll go to the next section, which is looking at the evolving technologies that we used for developing the newspaper. Producing a newspaper is a highly technical business, and that technology has developed quite considerably over the 100 years, always in search of images and colour, because it's by looking at visual images that people have really begun to appreciate current events. We have 2 types of technology that we consider in detail in the exhibition. The first is the actual print technology for the paper, and while we don't have any presses on display in the exhibition, we do have photographs that trace the different types of presses that were used. Linotype was a very specific development during that time. The early presses used individual letters that were put in place to form the words of the paper. Linotype machines actually used a library of moulds so that you could type in a whole line of type, and the machine would assemble those moulds and it would produce a line of words. Those lines would then be stacked into columns, and that would be used to print the paper. Those stories are told partly through the photographs of the courier and partly through examples of the type and of engraved display advertisements that have been retained by the paper to record their history. The second technology that we look at in the exhibition is photography. We've been very fortunate that the staff of the Te Awamutu Courier have retained a lot of their old equipment to trace their history. And in this display case, we have a succession of cameras through the years. We start off with a very early Leica and a twin lens reflex camera, and then you can see the transition to the telephoto lens, which signals the fact that sports photography became a very important part of the newspaper. If you look closely, you'll see that many of these more recent cameras have motor drives on them, and that was another important accessory that was used for sports photography. This camera here is is the first digital camera that they used at the Courier. It's an early Olympus, and another Nikon with bellows which extended like a telephoto lens. Two of the biggest differences in these cameras are clarity, and you'll see that underneath the twin lens reflex camera is a big roll of film, and the negatives that camera took were quite large, and it made beautifully clear photographs. So thanks to the Courier, we actually have a wonderful archive of really good photographs of the history of Te Awamutu, whereas the 35mm film that the Nikon cameras used have a much smaller negative, but the cameras are much more versatile. As we go through the time, we also see the development of colour, and in part that's just in colour film. Certainly by the time the digital camera was used, colour was an everyday occurrence, and the ability of the print technology to keep up with printing that colour happened in parallel with the development of the cameras. In the final section of the exhibition, we look at the relationship between the newspaper and the community. An obvious relationship is that the newspaper gets delivered to members of the community, and we have a newspaper sales box and the newspaper delivery bike to represent this aspect of their functioning. The staff of the Courier have a very active role in community events in the town, and this delightful costume here shows the outfits that the staff made out of copies of the Courier to wear in the Christmas parade in Te Awamutu last year. The framed cartoons along the back wall represent the final aspect of the connection between the newspaper and the community, in that the content of the paper that is reported cuts to the heart of the people who live in Te Awamutu and the things that occupy them. These cartoons were generated over the years by Henry Nicholas. They represent the messages of advertisers and also some cartoons that reflect life in Te Awamutu. So thank you for having a little look at our exhibition. If you live nearby, it would be lovely if you came and visited in person. Thank you.